The American nation was born on July 4th, 1776, when 13 colonies declared their independence from Great Britain. But it was not until the groundbreaking year of 1789 that the country had a fully operational national government. That was because 1789 was the first year that the new U.S. Constitution was put into effect. And the Constitution outlined a plan for a national government that the states had agreed upon. Following the guidelines that were written in the new Constitution, George Washington of Virginia was elected to be the first President of the United States of America, and John Adams of Massachusetts was chosen to be his Vice President. 2 months after his election, George Washington, at the age of 57, was inaugurated president. He was about to begin the extraordinarily difficult task of leading the world's only democracy, a type of government that hadn't been tried for a very long time. In fact, democracy had succeeded just once, and that was for a brief time back in ancient Greece. In 1789, the year Washington was elected, U.S. territory extended from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River, far beyond the boundaries of the original 13 colonies. Even so, most of North America was not under the control of the United States, for to the north in Canada lay territory controlled by Great Britain, while to the south and west lay territory mostly claimed by Spain. America's nearly 4 million citizens were spread over a very wide area, and the new federal government would serve to unify them all. It would collect taxes, regulate and oversee certain activities of their states, and it would also defend them in times of war. America's first president was a man very much beloved by the citizens of his country. He was a brave man who had led the Continental Army to victory over the British in the War for Independence. And he was a highly respected political leader who had presided over the convention that drew up the U.S. Constitution. Before Washington could start to carry out his duties as president, the United States Congress had to do 2 very important things required of it by the Constitution, and that were essential to a properly functioning national government. The first was to establish the executive departments. These were the departments of State, Treasury, and War that were to be directly under the President's control. The second was to establish the federal court system that Congress created by passing the Judiciary Act of 1789. One of Washington's first jobs as president was to appoint the people who would head these newly created departments. He chose Thomas Jefferson, minister to France during the Revolutionary War, to be his Secretary of State. Jefferson would deal with the nation's relations with foreign countries. Alexander Hamilton, a trusted military aide during the Revolution, was chosen to be his Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton would deal with the nation's financial matters. Henry Knox, a Revolutionary War hero, was selected to be his Secretary of War. Knox would oversee the nation's defense. The heads of the 3 executive departments were the president's closest personal advisors and made up his first presidential cabinet. Furthermore, President Washington nominated John Jay, a prominent lawyer and figure in New York politics, to be Chief Justice of the new Supreme Court, the nation's highest court. And as Washington continued to choose people to serve in the federal government, James Madison, United States Representative from Virginia, proposed 10 amendments to the new Constitution called the Bill of Rights that were designed to safeguard personal freedoms. And as America struggled to put together its new government, a revolution broke out in France in July of 1789. The repercussions of the French Revolution came to have a profound effect on United States foreign policy throughout the 1790s. In January of 1790, the U.S. Congress met here at the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia, the place where the Declaration of Independence was signed. This building was to serve as the country's temporary capital while decisions about a new U.S. capital city were made. In 1790, one of the most urgent orders of business for the U.S. government was to come up with a way to repay long overdue debts incurred during the Revolutionary War, including such things as the back pay owed to soldiers. Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton worked out a controversial repayment plan to meet this goal. But certain congressmen would only accept his plan if he arranged to have the new U.S. capital city built in the southern part of the country. A location in Maryland, pictured here, was decided upon, and Hamilton's repayment plan was passed. Then, not far from here along the banks of the Potomac River, President Washington selected the exact site where the federal city would someday stand. Interestingly, the spot he chose was just a few miles upstream from his home at Mount Vernon. Once the site had been chosen, a French engineer was hired to design the layout of the new city, which was to be based on a distinctive system of radiating boulevards. In 1791, Congress approved the creation of a privately owned bank called the Bank of the United States to handle the federal government's money. Alexander Hamilton had personally worked to have this bank created, for he believed it would help strengthen the government politically and economically. But Thomas Jefferson deeply opposed the bank, believing it to be a government-supported monopoly. Soon another issue arose that divided these two men, for Hamilton wanted the federal government to take an active role in promoting the development of American industry, and Jefferson did not. At this time, industrialization was just beginning to take hold in America. In fact, the factory in Rhode Island seen here, called Slater's Mill, opened right around the same time Hamilton was making his proposals to Congress. It was the first factory in the nation where water-powered machines were put to use in textile manufacturing. Machines like those in Slater's Mill had brought tremendous wealth to Great Britain, and Hamilton wanted the same thing to happen in the United States. To achieve this goal, Hamilton wanted the federal government to make payments to people who opened new factories, and to enact protective tariffs, special taxes on imported goods. Under this plan, there would be an added incentive to build factories, and untaxed American manufactured goods would become more affordable than similar foreign products upon which taxes were paid. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison were disgusted with Hamilton's plan, saying it represented unnecessary government interference. It was their belief that the federal government should play only a small role in the lives of the American people. Furthermore, Jefferson believed that massive industrialization would breed poverty and the growth of crowded, unhealthy cities. In contrast to Hamilton, Jefferson envisioned an American nation based on small, independent farms, places where a much more wholesome way of life could be pursued. In the end, Jefferson's view prevailed in Congress, and Hamilton's plan for the industrialization of America was defeated. Differing views on government, such as those voiced over the issue of industrialization, were what gave rise to America's first political parties. And by the time the national elections were held in 1792, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, and their supporters had formed the Federalist Party to promote their vision of a federal government that played a large and active role in American life. In opposition, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and their supporters had put together the Democratic-Republican Party to promote the idea of a country with a small federal government that rarely interfered in the lives of its citizens. It was in the year 1793 that George Washington began his second and last term as U.S. President. During his first term in office, Washington had focused on getting the new federal government up and running. But as the dawn of the 19th century drew nearer, political problems at home and war in Europe increasingly challenged the United States government. The same year the cotton gin was invented, the nation of France was fighting a major war in Europe. France had asked for U.S. military support, but George Washington decided America should remain neutral. In other words, he did not want his nation to take sides in the conflict. Washington made this decision in spite of the fact that America had signed a defense treaty with the royal government of France in order to secure their crucial help during the Revolutionary War. However, by 1793, France's monarchy had been overthrown and a new government was in place. Besides that, France's main enemy, Great Britain, had become America's biggest trading partner, and the United States could not afford to lose British business. In the end, the U.S. policy of neutrality caused big problems and angered both the French and the British. As a result, Britain and France captured American ships, and U.S. sailors were often forced to work as crew members on British vessels. In 1794, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Jay was sent to London on a diplomatic mission. Its main goals were to bring an end to British interference with American trade ships and to clear up a variety of problems, some dating back to the end of the Revolutionary War. Under the treaty that Jay finally negotiated, Britain agreed to turn over forts being used to supply arms to American Indians who were trying to put a stop to U.S. settlement on their lands. These British forts were located in the western Lake Erie region near present-day Detroit and Toledo. Also under Jay's treaty, the United States agreed to stop carrying goods between France and her colonies. In exchange, the U.S. got a few minor concessions from Britain to limit its interference with American trade ships. However, as far as France was concerned, Jay's treaty merely showed that America was far from neutral because of its willingness to give in to British demands. And as a result, an undeclared war broke out between the U.S. and France. As the United States government worked at solving its problems with France and Britain, trouble developed at home in the normally peaceful farm country of western Pennsylvania and Kentucky. People in these areas raised wheat, corn, and rye, and they used some of the grain to make whiskey. It was perfectly legal to make whiskey, but U.S. law said that persons who did so had to pay a tax. In fact, tax on alcohol was an important source of income for the federal government back in the 1790s. But many farmers refused to pay the tax. They even committed violence against the federal tax collectors, setting off what has come to be called the Whiskey Rebellion. To put an end to the rebellion, President Washington sent 15,000 U.S. troops into the region. This large show of force soon convinced the farmers to pay the taxes. And the rebels also were required to sign the document seen here, in which they agreed to respect the laws of the United States. And so, by taking swift military action against the Whiskey Rebellion, the American government made it clear that it would not tolerate activities that violated national laws. 1 year after the Whiskey Rebellion, negotiations on some important issues were underway here in the Kingdom of Spain between royal officials and the representatives of the United States. Under the agreement that was finally worked out, called the Treaty of San Lorenzo, the Spaniards gave up trying to rule an area of disputed land that had been claimed by both the U.S. and Spain. And as a result, thousands of square miles of new territory were added to the United States. This land later became parts of the states of Mississippi and Alabama. In addition, the treaty prevented Spanish military forces from interfering with American trading ships on the Mississippi River. Even beyond that, the Treaty of San Lorenzo allowed American products and products destined for the American West to be loaded and unloaded here in New Orleans, which was then under Spanish control, without being taxed. Having free access to the Mississippi River proved to be extremely important to America because it increased both trade and settlement in the western region of the country.